Here's the thing nobody warned me about when I started studying millionaires. Their mornings aren't magical. Their routines aren't revolutionary. Most of what they do before 8 a.m. would bore you to death if you watched it on camera. And yet when I copied those exact boring behaviors for 30 consecutive days, my income didn't just nudge upward, it jumped. Noticeably. Measurably. In ways I still find a little unsettling, because it forced me to confront an uncomfortable question. If the formula was this accessible the whole time, what exactly had I been doing with my life? Let me back up. I've spent the better part of 3 years consuming every piece of content about wealth building, productivity, and financial independence that the internet can throw at a person. Books, podcasts, courses, Twitter threads from guys with Greek statue profile pictures. I could recite the morning routine of a dozen billionaires from memory. I knew that Tim Cook wakes up at 3:45 a.m. I knew that Warren Buffett reads 500 pages a day. I knew that Mark Cuban doesn't take meetings before noon. I had the knowledge. What I didn't have was any meaningful change in my bank account. And I think you might be in a similar spot right now, which is exactly why this matters. Because here's the gap nobody talks about. Knowing what rich people do is free. It's everywhere. It's been blogged about, vlogged about, turned into infographics, and printed on coffee mugs. But there's a canyon-sized difference between knowing someone's routine and actually living inside of it day after day, when it's uncomfortable, when it doesn't feel productive, when your alarm goes off and every neuron in your body is screaming that this is pointless. That canyon is where all the money lives. And I didn't understand that until I forced myself to cross it. So let me tell you exactly what I did, what changed, and what I got wrong. Because I got several things very wrong. And those mistakes ended up being more valuable than the wins. The experiment started because of a spreadsheet. I'd been tracking my income for about 18 months, side hustles, freelance work, some investment returns, and I noticed a pattern that frustrated me. My income was flat. Not declining, not growing. Just flat. A plateau that felt like a ceiling. I was working hard. I was busy and productive. As you probably already suspect, are not the same animal. They don't even live in the same zip code. So I decided to do something I'd never actually committed to, which was stop studying millionaires' routines from the outside and start running them from the inside. Not a weekend experiment. Not a, let me try waking up early for 3 days and then write a tweet about it. 30 full days, no modifications, no cherry picking the comfortable parts. I would find the most common daily patterns among self-made millionaires, not inherited wealth, not lottery winners, not tech founders who got lucky once, but people who built wealth systematically, and I would replicate their days as closely as my life allowed. I pulled research from about 40 different sources. Interviews, biographies, podcasts, and one particularly useful study from Thomas Corley, who spent 5 years studying the daily habits of 233 wealthy individuals and 128 people living in poverty. His dataset is one of the most detailed ever compiled on this subject, and it revealed something that most content creators gloss over. The differences between how rich and poor people spend their days aren't dramatic. They're small, almost disappointingly small, but they compound. They compound the way interest compounds quietly and then overwhelmingly. Here's what the composite routine looked like when I mapped it out. Wake up early. Not 4 a.m. influencer early, but consistently before 6. Spend the first 60 to 90 minutes on yourself before you give any attention to the outside world. That means no email, no social media, no news. Exercise for at least 30 minutes, and not casually. Read or listen to something educational for at least 30 minutes. Plan your day on paper with your top 3 priorities identified before you open your laptop. Eat a real breakfast. Start your hardest, most revenue-generating task first, before anything reactive or administrative. Batch your communication into 2 or 3 windows instead of responding constantly. Spend at least 30 minutes per day on a skill or project that doesn't pay you yet, but could pay you later. Review your finances daily, even briefly. Go to bed early enough to protect tomorrow's routine. Reading that list, you might feel underwhelmed. Where's the secret? Where's the hack? Where's the one weird trick? That reaction, that feeling of this can't be enough, is precisely the trap. It's the reason most people consume this information and do nothing with it. We want the answer to feel proportional to the problem. We want a big life change to require a big, exciting intervention. But wealth doesn't work that way. Wealth is built in the ordinary hours, not the extraordinary ones. And the first thing I learned during this experiment is that the unsexy truth is the most profitable truth. Day one was rough, not because the tasks were hard. They weren't. It was rough because of what the routine displaced. I didn't realize how much of my morning was consumed by what I'll call reactive drift. You know the pattern. You wake up, grab your phone, check notifications, open email, scroll through news, respond to a few messages, watch a reel or two, and suddenly 90 minutes have evaporated and you haven't done a single thing that moves your life forward. You've only responded to other people's agendas. That first morning, when I sat down at 6:15 a.m. with a book and a cup of coffee and 0 screens, the silence felt almost aggressive. My brain was itching for stimulation, for input, for someone else's emergency to distract me from my own priorities, but I stayed with it. And something shifted by day 3. Without the morning noise, I started thinking more clearly. Not in a woo-woo manifestation kind of way, in a mechanical, almost boring way. My brain, deprived of the junk food it craved, started actually processing my own problems. I'd sit there reading about negotiation strategy or cash flow management and suddenly connected to something in my own business that I'd been ignoring. Ideas started surfacing, not because I was smarter, because I was quieter. By day 5, I started noticing the first tangible shift, and it had nothing to do with inspiration. It was about energy management. The exercise piece, which I had always treated as optional and usually skipped, turned out to be the load-bearing wall of the entire structure. 30 minutes of actual movement in the morning didn't just make me feel better. It restructured my cognitive stamina for the entire day. My afternoons, which had previously been a wasteland of brain fog and procrastination, suddenly became usable. I was getting a legitimate extra 2 to 3 hours of high-quality work per day, not by working longer, but by working when my brain was actually functional. Let me put a number on that because numbers are what matter here. If you gain 2 productive hours per day for 30 days, that's 60 hours. 60 hours of focused, high-leverage work that previously didn't exist in your life. That's not a marginal improvement. That's a second job's worth of output that you're pulling out of time you were already spending, just spending badly. But here's where the experiment got interesting, because the routine itself was only half the equation. The other half was what the routine made me stop doing. Around day 8, I ran into the single most uncomfortable part of the whole process, the daily finance review. I'd set aside 10 minutes each evening to look at my accounts, my spending, my income sources, and my projections. 10 minutes. That's it. And I hated it. Not because it was time-consuming, but because it forced me to confront realities I'd been successfully ignoring for months. I discovered I was spending $340 a month on subscriptions I barely used. I found that one of my income streams, which I'd been telling myself was growing, had actually been declining for 4 months straight. I realized my emergency fund was thinner than I thought, because I'd been mentally rounding up. None of these were catastrophic revelations on their own, but stacked together, they painted a picture of someone who was financially asleep at the wheel while telling himself he was financially literate. This is what Corley's research found too. 81% of the wealthy in his study maintained a to-do list. 63% spent less than 1 hour per day on recreational internet use. 88% read for self-education at least 30 minutes daily. But perhaps the most telling statistic was this. 94% of wealthy people said they kept close track of their money, compared to just 19% of low-income individuals. Not because poor people are irresponsible, because looking at your money when it's not where you want it to be is psychologically painful, and most of us avoid pain instinctively, even when that avoidance is costing us everything. The daily finance check became, honestly, the most valuable 10 minutes of my day. Not because I was making trades or moving money around, because awareness changes behavior without effort. When you know exactly where your money is going, you spend differently. You don't need willpower. You need visibility. And visibility, I learned, is something that wealthy people build into their routines structurally, not something they rely on motivation to maintain. Let me talk about the task prioritization piece now, because this is where the income change actually started to show up. The routine required me to identify my 3 most important tasks each morning before opening my laptop. And one of those 3 had to be directly tied to revenue generation. Not admin, not organizing my desk, not research, revenue, money. The thing that actually pays the bills and builds the future. Before this experiment, I would have told you I was focused on income. I would have said that with total confidence. But when I started tracking it honestly, I found that on most days I didn't touch a revenue generating activity until after lunch. My mornings were consumed by emails, Slack messages, minor client requests, social media management, and what I now think of as productive feeling busy work. The kind of activity that lets you feel like you're working hard while accomplishing almost nothing of consequence. Flipping that order, doing the money task first, before the noise, was like discovering a cheat code. And here's why it works, from a neurological standpoint. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex decision-making, creativity, and strategic thinking, is strongest in the first few hours after waking. By the time most people get to their important work, they've already burned through that cognitive fuel on decisions that don't matter. What email to reply to first? Whether to accept a meeting? How to word a Slack message? Each of those decisions, tiny as they seem, depletes the same cognitive resource you need for your highest leverage work. Millionaires protect that resource. Not consciously, usually. It's just baked into how they structure their time. They do the hard thing first because they've learned, through trial and error or through mentors who taught them, that the hard thing done at 7 a.m. produces 10 times the result of the same hard thing done at 3 p.m. By day 12, I had already closed a deal I'd been procrastinating on for weeks. It wasn't a complicated deal. It wasn't even a particularly large one. But it had been sitting in my pipeline untouched because I kept telling myself I'd get to it later. When my routine forced me to make revenue-generating work, the first thing I touched each day later disappeared. The deal got done. The money hit my account. And I realized with uncomfortable clarity that the only thing standing between me and that income had been my own daily structure. This is the part where I need to be honest about something, because I don't want to sell you a fantasy. The routine didn't magically triple my income overnight. What it did was remove the friction that was preventing income I should have been earning from actually materializing. Think about that distinction carefully. Most of us don't have an earning potential problem. We have a friction problem. We have the skills, the network, the ideas, and the opportunities. But our daily habits create so much drag that the money can't move. The millionaire routine didn't add horsepower. It reduced drag. By the end of week 2, here's what had changed concretely. I'd closed that stalled deal. I'd identified and canceled $340 in unnecessary monthly expenses. I'd started a side project during my daily future investment time that was already generating its first leads. I'd renegotiated one rate with a client, something I'd been avoiding because the conversation felt awkward. And I'd read 6 books, more than I'd read in the previous 3 months combined. But the most important change wasn't financial. It was psychological. And this is the part that nobody talks about in the Copy Millionaire routines content, because it's hard to photograph and impossible to put on a thumbnail. The routine changed how I saw myself. There's a concept in psychology called identity-based behavior change, popularized by James Clear but rooted in decades of research. The idea is simple but profound. You don't change your behavior to match your goals. You change your identity, and then your behavior follows automatically. When you wake up at 5:30 a.m., exercise, read, plan your day with intention, do your hardest work first, and review your finances every evening, you're not just completing tasks, you're casting votes for a new identity. You're telling yourself, through action, I am the kind of person who takes their financial life seriously. And after enough of those votes, your brain starts to believe it. And when your brain believes it, everything shifts. You stop negotiating with yourself about whether to do the work. It just becomes who you are. Around day 17, I noticed I'd stopped dreading the early alarm. I wasn't dragging myself out of bed anymore. I was waking up before it went off. Not because I'd become some disciplined superhero, because my brain had recategorized the routine from obligation to identity. It wasn't something I had to do. It was something I did. That distinction sounds small on paper. In practice, it's the difference between people who sustain change and people who burn out after 2 weeks and go back to scrolling in bed until 8:30. Now, I promise to tell you what I got wrong, and this is important because the mistakes revealed something about millionaire routines that no one seems to address. My first mistake was copying the aesthetics of the routine without understanding the principles behind it. Early in the experiment, I was obsessed with the specific wake-up time, 5:30. Not 5:45, not 6, 5:30 because that's what the data said. But here's what I eventually realized. The time itself doesn't matter. What matters is the margin. Wealthy people wake up early not because 5:30 a.m. has magical properties, but because it creates a buffer between their priorities and the world's demands. If you work a job that starts at noon and you wake up at 8 a.m., you have the same margin as someone who wakes up at 5:30 for a 9 a.m. start. The principle is margin. The tactic is the specific time. And when you copy tactics without understanding principles, you build a house on sand. My second mistake was trying to go from 0 to perfect on day 1. I attempted to implement every single element of the routine simultaneously. The early wake up, the exercise, the reading, the planning, the revenue first work, the batched communication, the evening finance review, the early bedtime. All of it, all at once. By day 4, I was exhausted, not from the activities themselves, but from the decision fatigue of managing so many new behaviors simultaneously. I almost quit. I would have quit except I'd told enough people about the experiment that my ego wouldn't let me. What saved me was scaling back temporarily. I kept the wake-up time, the planning, and the revenue first work, and I let everything else be imperfect for the first 10 days. Then I layered in exercise, then the reading, then the finance review. By day 15, I was running the full routine, but I'd built up to it in a way that let each habit stabilize before adding the next one. This, I later learned, is actually how most successful people build their routines. They don't install a perfect system overnight. They iterate. They test. They keep what works and discard what doesn't. The perfect morning routine you see in a YouTube video is usually the result of years of refinement, not a single decision. My third mistake was the most interesting one, and it taught me something I haven't seen discussed anywhere else. I was so focused on copying what millionaires do in the morning that I completely ignored what they don't do in the evening. And the evening turned out to be the linchpin of everything. Here's what I mean. You can't wake up at 5:30 a.m. if you went to bed at midnight. You can't go to bed at 10 p.m. if you're doom scrolling from 9 to 11:30. You can't stop scrolling if you haven't created an alternative evening routine that winds your brain down without a screen. The morning routine everyone obsesses over is actually the output. The evening routine is the input. And almost every wealthy person I studied had a deliberate, structured evening that protected the next morning. Some read fiction. Some journaled. Some reviewed their day and planned the next one. Some had a hard technology cutoff at 8 or 9 p.m., but all of them treated the evening as sacred preparation, not as dump time where you collapse on the couch and let algorithms decide what you think about before sleep. When I fixed my evenings, around day 14, the mornings became almost effortless. I was falling asleep faster, sleeping more deeply, and waking up with a clarity that made the first 90 minutes of my day dramatically more effective. The compounding effect was staggering. Better sleep led to better focus, which led to better work output, which led to more income, which led to more confidence, which led to better sleep. The flywheel started spinning, and the energy it generated was self-reinforcing. Let me give you the income numbers now, because I know that's what you're actually here for, and I respect you enough not to bury them. Before the experiment, my average monthly income across all sources was approximately $6,200. Decent, not terrible, but flat and frustrating given the amount of effort I was putting in. By the end of the 30 days, my income for that month was $9,100. That's a 47% increase in 1 month. Now, I need to be transparent about what drove that number, because I don't want to imply that waking up early magically deposited $2,900 into my checking account. The increase came from 4 specific sources. First, the deal I'd been procrastinating on, which I finally closed in week 2, that accounted for about $1,400. Second, the subscription cancellations and expense reductions, which technically aren't income but function identically in your financial life. That saved about $340. Third, a rate renegotiation with an existing client that I'd been avoiding for months. That added roughly $600 in recurring monthly revenue. Fourth, the side project I'd started during my daily future investment time, which brought in about $560 in its first month, largely from skills I already had but hadn't been deploying. None of these were windfalls. None of them required luck. Every single dollar of that increase was money that was available to me before the experiment. It was sitting there waiting to be captured. The routine didn't create the money. It removed the obstacles between me and the money. And those obstacles were entirely self-imposed. Procrastination, avoidance, poor energy management, reactive work habits. Financial blindness. These are the invisible taxes that most people pay every single day without even knowing they're paying them. I want to zoom out now and talk about something bigger, because this experiment taught me a lesson that extends far beyond morning routines and daily habits. There's a narrative in our culture that wealth is primarily about intelligence, or about access, or about having the right idea at the right time. And those things matter. I'm not going to pretend they don't. But what I experienced during these 30 days convinced me that for most people, the bottleneck isn't intelligence or access or timing. It's structure. It's the architecture of your daily life. It's the sequence of decisions you make between waking up and going to sleep, most of which you're making unconsciously, on autopilot, based on habits you installed years ago and never questioned. Millionaires aren't millionaires because they have better mornings. They're millionaires because they've deliberately designed a daily structure that minimizes waste, maximizes cognitive output, and aligns their time with their highest value activities. The morning routine is just the visible tip of that iceberg. Beneath the surface is a comprehensive operating system for how they move through each day. And almost every element of that system is optimized to reduce friction between effort and result. You can have the same skills as a millionaire. You can have the same ideas. You can even work the same number of hours. But if your daily structure is leaking energy, attention, and intention at every seam, you'll produce a fraction of the output. And you'll feel exhausted doing it, which is the cruelest part. You won't just earn less. You'll suffer more in the process. This is why the just work harder advice is so toxic and so incomplete. Working harder inside a broken structure is like pressing the gas pedal with the parking brake on. You'll generate heat, noise, and the feeling of effort, but you won't go anywhere meaningful. The millionaire routine isn't about adding more effort. It's about releasing the brakes. Let me tell you about something that happened on day 23 that crystallized all of this for me. I was sitting at my desk at 7:15 in the morning, deep into a proposal for a new client. It was a project I'd been thinking about pursuing for weeks, but hadn't started because Well, I was too busy. The truth is, I'd been too busy doing things that didn't matter to get around to the things that did. But on this morning, following the routine, I'd already exercised, already read, already planned my day, and this proposal was my number one revenue task. So there I was, actually doing it. And I finished it by 8:45 a.m. By 8:45, I had completed the single most important piece of work on my plate, and the rest of the world hadn't even fully woken up yet. My inbox had barely started filling. Nobody had asked me for anything. I had the whole rest of the day stretching out in front of me, and the hardest thing was already done. That feeling, that sense of being ahead of your own life instead of perpetually chasing it, is something I'd never experienced with consistency before. And it's addictive. Not in a toxic hustle culture way, in a deeply satisfying, calm way. Like the difference between sprinting to catch a bus and sitting on the bus watching the scenery. Same destination, completely different experience. That proposal, by the way, landed the client an additional $2,400 per month in recurring revenue. It kicked in the month after the experiment ended, so it's not included in the 30 day numbers. But it exists directly because of the routine. Without the structure forcing revenue-generating work to the top of the stack, I would have kept putting it off, probably indefinitely. Probably until someone else got the contract. This brings me to what I think is the deepest and most important insight from the entire experiment. The difference between you and the millionaire version of you is probably not a skill gap. It's not a knowledge gap. It's an implementation gap lives inside your daily routine. It lives in the 2 hours you spend on your phone before doing meaningful work. It lives in the meetings you take that could be emails. It lives in the financial statements you don't look at because looking at them makes you feel bad. It lives in the hard conversation you're avoiding, the rate you haven't renegotiated, the project you haven't started, the skill you haven't practiced. All of that unlived potential is sitting inside the gaps of a poorly designed day. Fixing the day fixes the gap. Not instantly, not magically, but reliably, predictably, mathematically. I kept the routine going after day 30. I'm still running a version of it, modified and refined to fit my life better now that I understand the principles behind the tactics. And the income trajectory has continued. Not in a straight line, nothing real moves in a straight line, but the trend is unmistakably upward. More importantly, the feeling of control is something I don't think I'll ever willingly give up. It's become foundational to how I experience my life. Here's what I want you to take away from this. And I'm going to be direct because you deserve directness. You don't need more information. You have enough information. If you've watched even 10% of the financial self-improvement content on this platform, you already know more about building wealth than 90% of the people who actually build it. The information isn't the bottleneck. Your daily structure is the bottleneck. The invisible architecture of your hours is the bottleneck. And it's a bottleneck you can fix starting tomorrow morning for free with zero special tools, apps, courses, or equipment. But here's the catch, and this is the part where most people will nod along and then do absolutely nothing. You have to actually do it. Not think about doing it. Not plan to start next Monday. Not save this video to watch again later. You have to set the alarm tonight. You have to lay out your workout clothes. You have to put your phone in another room. You have to write down tomorrow's 3 priorities on a piece of paper before you go to sleep. You have to do the small, boring, unsexy thing that separates people who know from people who have. Because here's the truth that took me 30 days to fully internalize. A truth that's been available to me for years, and that I kept sliding past like it was just another motivational platitude. The money is in the mundane, not in the viral moment, not in the perfect investment, not in the one big idea. The money is in the boring, repeated, consistent, daily execution of simple principles that wealthy people follow and everyone else knows about but ignores. I started this experiment expecting to learn some secret, some hidden tactic that millionaires use that the rest of us haven't discovered. And what I found instead was almost embarrassing in its simplicity. They wake up with intention. They protect their cognitive energy. They do hard things first. They watch their money closely. They invest time in their future selves. They go to bed early enough to do it all again tomorrow. That's it. That's the whole formula. And the reason it works isn't because any single element is powerful. It's because the combination, executed consistently, creates a compound effect that turns small daily advantages into enormous long-term outcomes. An hour of focused work today is just an hour. An hour of focused work every day for a year is a career transformation. And the only thing standing between those two realities is a routine you decide to either run or ignore. I'm going to leave you with one thought that I keep coming back to. One that I think about almost every morning now when my alarm goes off and the bed is warm and the world is dark and every part of me wants to stay under the covers. Every millionaire was once in the exact position you're in right now, not financially necessarily, in terms of the decision, the daily decision, the choice between the easy default and the intentional alternative. They chose the alternative enough times that it stopped being a choice and became an identity. And once it became an identity, the money followed. Not because the universe rewarded their discipline, because their discipline removed every obstacle between their effort and their earning. You already know what to do. The question is whether tomorrow morning, when it's dark and quiet and nobody's watching, you'll actually do it. If this video made you rethink how you structure your day, drop a comment and tell me the one part of your routine you're going to change first. I'm genuinely curious and I read every comment. If you're the kind of person who watches content like this and actually takes action on it, you're the kind of person this channel is built for. Subscribe, because the next video goes deeper into the specific financial systems that self-made millionaires use to track, protect, and multiply their money. And it's the piece of the puzzle that most people are completely missing. Your alarm is going to go off tomorrow morning. When it does, you'll have about 3 seconds before your brain starts negotiating. In those 3 seconds, remember this: the money is in the mundane, and the mundane starts now.